we're now joined by Clem Burke. How are you today, Clem?
I'm good, man. How are you, Jay?
So great to see you, man. I got to tell you, one of my favorite drummers, and I've loved rock and roll since I saw the Beatles and Ed Sullivan when I was 5.
Right.
And my family moved to England. So I grew up during the British invasion, 64, 65, 66. And we really, you know, I've done so much in the business, and, you know, one of my treats is to interview people like you. And I got to say that, you know, I love all the work you do. Just saw you with the Empty Hearts and, of course, Romantics, but all the way back to the early days of Blondie.
Right.
You've kept that teenage spirit. You know,
well,
who inspired you when you were growing up to get the bug?
Well, Ringo.
Yeah.
Dino Danelli. And Carmine Appice, Vanilla Fudge. Really was all about, probably like most people, I'm a little older than you, so seeing the Beatles on Ed Sullivan was opened the sort of the door to.
I mean, it had to be millions of bands for him the next week.
Yeah, I mean,
the garages were noisy.
Yeah, I wasn't a teenager yet, but
okay.
Big, yeah. Ringo
and of course,
thing.
Keith Moon.
Keith Moon, yeah, The Who.
Yeah.
Yeah, later on, a little later.
That's beautiful.
First album, Who Sings My Generation.
Yeah. So growing up in that New York, New Jersey area, playing in bands, how did you meet Debbie, Harry, and Chris? How did that all form?
Well, there was a club called Club 82, 82 East 4th Street. That was coincidentally around the corner from CBGB. I had a band called Sweet Revenge, kind of a glam rock band. Debbie and Chris had a band called the Stilettos. And we played on the same circuit, Wayne County. The Neon Boys, which is a band before television.
Okay.
It was a hangout, it was a disco, but once a week they'd have rock bands. And sort of New York Dolls there, the Stilettos there. Like I said, my band played there. And that's where we all kind of met, on that sort of New York glam rock scene, kind of the tail end of it.
Yeah, yeah. So what was it like, you know, when the Dolls were doing their thing, and, you know, that explosion, you know, kind of this punk alternative glam, obviously influenced a lot by the British bands with Bowie and everything, but what was the feeling in the air, you know, with those times?
Well, you know, just the fact that the New York Dolls had a record deal, and, you know, they were like gods to me. They were like larger than life. And, you know, obviously they had their ups and downs, but I think they were the spark. I mean, there hadn't been a band since the Velvet Underground that represented, you know, New York City quite the same way the New York Dolls did. And they were kind of like the, kind of lit the fuse on the New York rock scene.
Yeah.
And then, you know, the fuse that kind of subsided rather quickly, because basically they had no commercial success. Yeah. But they were inspiring to everything that came after them, whether it be the Ramones or obviously Johnny Thunders had a band called the Heartbreakers. And the Dolls were they were the muse for everyone to continue, you know. Yeah, and I just saw David Johansen do a gig in Manhattan 2 weeks ago.
Is that right?
Yeah. Little cabaret gig. Not as Buster, as David. He looked like Buster.
Okay.
But he was billed as David.
Right.
And it was really great. It was really great.
That's amazing.
Did some songs from the last couple of Dolls records.
Yeah. Well, they, like you said, it was an atom bomb, and of course Iggy and the Stooges doing their thing coming around, and MC5 and all that stuff coming out of Detroit. Right. You know, what's always amazing is the Americans influenced the British, and then the British influenced the Americans, and you know, it goes back and forth. Right. Now, I know with Blondie, you obviously broke through with that UK press, with that buzz you got over there, which translated, I guess, to eventually the Chrysalis deal and all that. Talk about, you know, going to the UK for the first time.
Well, the first time we went to the UK, we were on a tour with our friends, Television. We were supporting them. And it was a theater tour of the UK. The first gig was at the Apollo in Glasgow in early 1977. And we played London on that tour, Manchester, Birmingham. And actually the first gig we did, we played at a college the night before, headlining at a small college venue, and Squeeze were opening there. That was in 77. And yeah, you know, initially, well, our first success really was in Australia.
Okay.
With a song called "In the Flesh" off the first Blondie album. But
so radio over there jumped on that.
Actually, there was a TV show over there called. The presenter's a guy called Molly Meldrum.
Oh, sure.
Pretty legendary guy.
Famous guy.
What the heck was the name of the TV show now? I forget. What
But
exactly
they showed video clips?
Yeah, he announced the video as being a song called Ex-Offender, which we did do a video for, which we also did a video for In the Flesh, and we did a video for another song, In the Sun. But we did all those videos just miming to 3 songs in one day, with photographer Bob Gruen being the cameraman, and a guy called Richard Robinson was the director, Lisa Robinson's brother.
Yeah.
And so this song was announced as Ex-Offender, but it was In the Flesh, which is kind of a ballad. It's kind of a doo-wop 50s song, you know, that actually Ellie Greenwich sings back up on. And Richard Goddard, our producer, spent a lot of time on that song, actually. He kind of was of the school of thought, producer-wise. He'd choose maybe 2 or 3 songs to really focus in on, to really produce, and then the rest kind of just bang out in the studio, and that's basically what the first album was about. You had Ex-Offender, you had In the Flesh, and anyway, when Molly Meldrum played the song as Ex-Offender, which was In the Flesh, people responded to it and became a #1 in Australia in 1977. So that was our first hit. And it was very unrepresentative of the band, particularly our stage act, let's say. So when we went to Australia the first time, some people were a bit shocked, maybe about our presentation, about our live performance, which was basically, you know, very sort of rock and roll with a bit of chaos thrown in, and we weren't the greatest of musicians at the time, and you know, jumping around a lot, and it wasn't what they expected, so it was kind of a funny tour.
Amazing. So obviously Australia being connected to the motherland in England, it kind of went back there.
Right. Well, we actually had our first hit was off the second album in the UK.
Yeah.
Denis, but it really dawned on us that we were kind of special, not to compare music-wise, but along with sort of like Jimi Hendrix, or there was only a handful of U.S. bands that actually broke in the UK first. After the fact were the Strokes, for instance. So we were kind of pretty happy to realize that we were having some success in the UK, and sex, by the way, in the UK. Prior to the success in the U.S., and also, as you mentioned, the UK influence on the band and basically on all American rock and roll musicians of a certain generation.
Yeah.
So it was a real thrill to have that success and experience, you know, what it meant to be on the road in the UK. It was really fun. We had a really good time.
Yeah, this is obviously a fertile time. Obviously the Ramones had infected the country, and Clash and the Pistols and all this stuff was brewing.
Yeah, the Ramones and the Talking Heads were on tour at basically at the same time that we were on our first tour.
Okay.
Yeah, I saw them somewhere, maybe in Birmingham or something.
Yeah, and I guess you were up for anything, being all these bands from New York, wherever the pockets, you know, may open up first. It's all fans. You know?
Well, you know, New York and London have a really tight connection, especially back then, prior to, you know, the internet, for instance. You know, I mean, New York, Manhattan's really like a European city, and, you know, it's not that far away. L.A. was a little different story, the distance between L.A. and London versus the distance between New York and London. So there was an empathy there that was happening kind of simultaneously.
Yeah.
And I had gone over to the UK in '75 for a visit and saw bands like Eddie and the Hot Rods and Curso Flyers, and particularly Dr. Feelgood, who were at the sort of peak of their success in like 1975. Saw them play at a Hammersmith Odeon, and they were a big influence on me in particular, and just the fact that there was a band having such success and playing so it's basically in a very minimal style, or I don't want to say a retro style, but maybe it was a bit incorporating those old sort of blues and rock and roll songs, and their look, you know, was very influential. or actually it was happening simultaneously in New York, and the way they looked, like Wilco Johnson, the hair and all that stuff. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were Dr. Feelgood, one of my favorite bands.
Sure. So it was kind of an organic
Nothing to
growth.
do with Motley Crue, by the way.
Of course. But an organic growth over time. Of course, you had people like the great Rodney Bingenheimer out here who started playing in the band.
Yeah,
and
Rodney was very much an early champion of Blondie. I mean, he was probably the first person to play Blondie in the U.S. Still a friend of ours to this day. A lot of respect for Rodney. I think he's in Japan right now, actually. I think his girlfriend directed some film that they're showing in Japan right now. But no, Rodney, you know, he deserves all the kudos he can get. He's really an innovator in as far as his taste in music and catching on to newer ideas a lot more quickly than a lot of other people.
Certainly.
Unfortunately, not the best businessman, I don't think.
No.
You know, I think Rodney should be in a much better place
Yeah.
in his life, business.
Should have a Sirius XM show at least.
Yeah, I mean, I think he was offered that maybe, but you know, he has an allegiance to K-Rock, and but Rodney's a great guy.
Yeah, no question
Not
about
to
it.
be underestimated.
There's few leaders, mostly followers out there.
Right.
People want to jump on the bandwagon.
Right.
So in America, obviously, it was a little more of you know, growth. Obviously, Parallel Lines broke through in a big way. Talk about really, you know, breaking through in America, really feeling that, you know, radio buzz and working with people like Mike Chapman.
Right. Well, we were playing at the Whiskey a go-go. I guess it was. It was the second time, I guess, that we had been out here. Because the first time we came out to L.A., we played for 2 weeks at the Whiskey. The first week we played 6 nights, 2 shows a night, and it was in February of '77, I believe. Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers were our opening band, and then we played the following week, the same thing, 6 shows a night, 6 shows a week. I mean, 6 days, 2 shows a night, and we opened for the Ramones.
Okay.
So, yeah. What was where else we're going?
Well,
with Mike Chapman came to an early Blondie show the second time around, because I believe we had Frank Infante in the band at that time. Gary Valentine, our original bass player, had left. So, yeah, so Mike came to see us along with Nigel Harrison, who went on to join Blondie. We did some shows as a 5-piece with Frank Infante. And Mike was basically got in contact with us via Chrysalis Records when we signed. We left the indie that we were on, Private Stock, and we signed to Chrysalis, and it was an idea for Mike to maybe work with us. And of course, Mike, having worked with Suzi Quatro and the Swede and all these other kind of teeny bopper English bands like Mud and Show Waddy Waddy, and songwriting, wrote Ballroom Blitz. He wrote, you know, Can to Can for Suzi Quatro, things like that. So I kind of immediately got it that he would be probably more or less outside of Bjorn and Benny from ABBA. He'd probably be the most perfect producer for us, and he was at the time. But you know, took a long time for Parallel Lines to be successful. Something you don't get nowadays. I think it was on the charts for like maybe 52 weeks or more. Wow. And you know, we prior to Heart of Glass being a hit, we released 1 or 2 other singles.
Hanging on the telephone, maybe. One way or the other.
We had the success in the UK with the earlier singles, Picture This, but not in the US. And we were on tour with the Kinks, supporting the Kinks for about 2 months prior to the release of Heart of Glass. And that was a real fun tour. We also played with Tom Petty again on that tour too.
Yeah. So Heart of Glass,
so
obviously.
it was a gradual build for the Parallel Lines, but there was a lot of foundation that was laid down over the last couple of years worldwide. Yeah. And then, like with the third album, Parallel Lines, it kind of the U.S. finally kind of caught on to Blondie a bit, and you know, the song that they caught on was you know, Heart of Glass, basically. Yeah.
You know, I know at the time, obviously, you're a rockin' band, and you get the people, you know, with the disco tag and all that, you know, what was the feeling inside the band? I mean, obviously the exposure was great and you were a diverse band, but live, like you said, you were definitely more raw, more rock and roll.
Yeah, now funny enough, there was a parallel there between what happened in Australia within the Flesh, which was more of a one-off type of song for Blondie. Once again, with Heart of Glass, we thought we were basically experimenting. You know, we used an old, very new, now it's old, Roland drum machine. Same one that's, I forget what model it was, a very early programmable drum machine that I used, and it's on the Phil Collins album as well.
Okay.
And you know, we were influenced by Kraftwerk and the Bee Gees really in that song. And our creative palette was always a lot broader than, I mean, you look at the Ramones, a great band, but they definitely had a sort of a manifesto of what they didn't want to do.
Yeah.
I think our manifesto was more like anything goes, you know, so.
Especially in the studio, I mean, you can experiment and change it up a little bit live.
Yeah, and getting back to a place like Club 82, when the New York Dolls or Wayne County or the Stilettos weren't playing, the music that they played in the club was dance music. Things like, you know, Shame, 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 or like Bee Gees or Donna Summer. You know, we were influenced by Giorgio Moroder. We wanted to work with him, would Call Me.
Now, what was that like? Because obviously he kind of comes in with his track and his idea. Well, as a band, how do you deal with that?
We played to a track that was already programmed.
Okay.
That might have been the first time we ever did something like that. He had a synthesizer program.
Yeah.
And we played to, you know, he wrote the music, Debbie rewrote his lyrics, and it turned into Call Me. But yeah, we did play to a program.
Okay.
And, you know, and so this is before, you know, MIDI and things like that, so you had to do it very organically.
Yeah.
And, you know, the track was, a synthesizer track was put down, you know, manually by Giorgio or Keith Forsey or somebody. Or Harold Faltermeyer actually was
there you
the
go.
guy.
Yeah.
The guy that went on to do Beverly Hills Cop and all that
right.
stuff. Harold was you know, on that session as well.
Okay. And of course the great Eat to the Beat album, Dreamin', you know, great drum line in that. Talk about recording a song like Dreamin'.
Well, I mean, I've said it many times before, it was just kind of like a sound check, kind of just a run through in the studio. And I was just kind of basically, you know, just kind of having fun, which is kind of what it's about sometimes. And Mike Chapman, I guess, decided to keep that drum track and built the track up from that drum track. And it was a very early take, if not first take. And I think if we had kind of proceeded with doing multiple takes, I probably would have reined it in a bit. And, you know, it's like Joey Ramone's favorite Blondie song, and people always talk about how great the drums are on it, but I kind of feel like it might have been a more commercial song if the drums had been kind of reined in a bit. But as far as a drum track, yeah, it was fun to do, early take.
Yeah.
People always mention that, Union City, Blue. The Eat to the Beat album was kind of funny because Mike was so particular in the studio on Parallel Lines, and we're to the point where he would kind of come into on the studio floor and conduct us doing a basic track, for instance, and sometimes he'd play guitar along with us. And then he kind of like loosened the reins a little bit on Eat to the Beat. For instance, what I just said about Dreaming, not being so particular about you know, the track being a certain way, just kind of letting it flow. And I think that kind of worked in everybody's favor because we were prepared to work in the same manner that we worked on Parallel Lines, but we did do it a little differently. And I think you hear that, as I said, that's kind of, Eat to the Beat's kind of a rock and roll Blondie record. I mean, there's a fake disco song on there too, Atomic, but
yeah,
Eat to the Beat's a good album. You know, it's done at the Power Station, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I know, of course, with Rapture, you guys were the first guys on Top 40 Radio to talk about rap.
Yeah,
you know,
it's
hip
all
hop
our
coming out
fault.
of New York. We blame you for it all.
Yeah.
But you know, what was your memory of that? Because obviously Grandmaster Flash and, you know, what was coming up out of the streets of, you know, the Brooklyn and the Bronx was, you know, obviously buzzing into town.
Yeah, well, we had heard Rappers Delight, and you know, once again with Chris and Debbie, kind of experimenting with different things, going up to the South Bronx, going to you know, rap battles and hearing that music. I just remember after the album was complete, I remember playing that track for my friends and just seeing their jaws drop, you know, like rap was a very, very new art form, although there was the Last Poets.
Yeah,
you know.
And of course the Clash famously had Grandmaster Flash open to the Bunk Casino.
I mean, we weren't the only band that was kind of, using, the influences that were around of the day, the Clash were.
Yeah.
But, once again, like with Heart of Glass, certain people frowned on those kind of musical influences. And I think the thing with Blondie and with the members of Blondie, we always kind of had an open mind about where we were going to go with the music, and it never allowed us to inhibit what we were trying to do, even if we had not been that great at it, for instance, or we would still try certain styles. I mean, on E to the Beat, there's an early attempt at reggae, Die Young, Stay Pretty. If I played that song today, I would play it a lot differently than I played it back then, for instance.
Yeah.
But, there's a lot of stuff out there. I mean, great art always takes from other great art, really.
Of course.
Basically, there's always going to be an influence in music. There's hardly anything that's completely original.
Yeah.
And usually if it's original, it's offensive to most people.
Yeah, you're paying tribute in a lot of ways, and of course the tide is high and all that. I heard when I moved here in 1980, somebody told me Blondie's recording with Mike Chapman there at United Western Studios.
Right, we were there.
So is that where that was caught?
Yeah, we did that whole album there with Rapture and all that stuff, yeah.
Okay.
Wildman Fisher was hanging out with us quite a bit then. He was like on the street in front of the studio.
Yeah.
A lot of history in that studio.
Of course.
And that's the only album that we made out of Manhattan, out of New York City, prior to, we did albums.
And that was Mike's suggestion?
Yeah, we forced him to come to New York all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, the record company and Mike, everybody wanted us to be in L.A., move to L.A., and, all that kind of stuff. But, I remember it was a real brutal winter. We brought Mike out, for pre-production. I forget on what album. Might have been for Parallel Lines.
Right. And he was not digging the snow.
No, but he grew to like New York.
I guess he lives in Connecticut now, so he must deal with it. Yeah. Well, obviously you've had an amazing career outside of that. Blondie is obviously still together, and you're one of the original members. But talk about our friends the Romantics. Love the Romantics from day one, coming out of Detroit, mixing that British invasion with that Detroit rock and roll.
Yeah.
What was it about the Romantics that drew you in to want to play with Wally and the boys?
Well, I met the Romantics, in a bar somewhere, and we became friends, and they were between drummers, and they wanted to do some recording, and I was asked by actually Cos Candler, who's no longer in the band, to come out to Detroit, and I did some recording with them, and they've been on the road forever, and they needed a drummer, and they asked me if I would do it. It was a good experience. I did it on and off for about 10 years, actually.
Yeah.
A lot of great gigs. Probably went to every state in the Union with the Romantics, including Alaska and places like South Dakota and places we never really went to with Blondie.
Yeah.
And, the Romantics are still going strong. I handed the gig over to my friend Brad Elvis when we reformed Blondie back in the late 90s.
Sure.
And he's been with the band ever since.
Yeah.
Also, Johnny B. Bedanchek played with the Romantics for a while, which is a great Detroit Wheels drummer.
Yeah.
Fantastic drummer, great artist.
Yeah.
Now I have the band with Wally Palmer, the Empty Hearts, which is where I met you
more
recently in Malibu.
Yeah, how'd that come about? You got Elliot Easton in there, and you got Andy. How'd that come about?
Once again, mutual friends, and I had the history with Wally. Andy Buke was in a band called Chesterfield Kings. Elliot and I have been friends when he was in the Cars, and we tried to put a band together with the late Doug Feiger a bunch of years ago.
Yeah.
Always talked about working together, Doug from the Knack, and timing just seemed right that we would all be able to come together and do this Empty Hearts record, which we're all really proud of. Ed Stasium co-produced it with us, a great producer. And Ian McLagan plays keyboards on it. And
rest in peace, the great Ian. Talk about him. I've done sessions with him, and he's just magical. When he hits that organ, it's just reminds you of all the classic British music.
He was a great musician, and he played some honky-tonk piano as well on it. There's a great outtake that is up on the Empty Hearts website of Ian just playing the piano, upright piano in the studio in New York where we recorded the album. Really, it was really an honor to have Ian on the record. I had made a record with him prior to that with a guy called B.P. Fallon in Austin, and became friendly with Mac, and I was able to call him up and ask him if he would be willing to play on the Empty Hearts record.
Yeah.
And it kind of worked out. He was on tour because we did that in Rochester, and he did a gig in Rochester on his way to Syracuse with a day off in the middle, so it worked out perfectly.
Wow. For
him to come into the studio. He's a gentleman. He's great. We had some other mutual friends along the way, and I was really shocked to hear of his passing. There would have been a chance that maybe he would have did some shows with us. With the
Sure. We've lost so many greats, David Bowie and Prince, and
rough, right?
it's you're afraid to pick up the newspaper, go on the internet. It seems like somebody every week is passing, and part of the problem is with so many changes in the industry, it doesn't seem like we're making as many stars and legends as we're losing. So you kind of wonder, they pulled music from the schools. Is the next generation going to have what we enjoyed, what we took for granted? Is it even going to be there?
Well, rock and roll isn't what I would call pop music anymore. I feel as though I can make that analogy between what it must have been like when rock and roll kind of came up in the 50s to what it did to the jazz musician. All of a sudden, jazz, which was like kind of really cool, was sort of all of a sudden it was uncool. It wasn't commercial, and I think it put a lot of people in a compromised position. Then a lot of great musicians, a lot of people, blues and jazz musicians, had to go to Europe to find an audience because everybody in the States was caught up with rock and roll. So you could kind of make that analogy today with rock and roll is past middle age, the music form. It began in the 50s basically. It's beyond middle age, and most of its performers the legends are beyond middle age. So yeah, it is a curious time for rock and roll as far as how it's going to progress. I mean, I will say I think people like Jack White and Noel Gallagher are of the same genius of, you name it, Bowie or
Townsend or
Townsend. They're equally as equally great. Let's put it that way in my mind. And I think there are people out there. I just saw the Brian Jonestown Massacre last night, and they are an underground band, but very prolific, and they were fantastic. There's a lot of great music out there. I mean, and you look at like a band like Dinosaur Jr. sold out a week at the Bowery Ballroom in New York. Brian Jonestown Massacre sold out 3 days in downtown LA this past week. But the point is, I think it's more of a niche audience, and it's more like underground rock and roll in a lot of ways. And it's definitely not in the zeitgeist of the modern day. It's just not there.
You don't hear too many guitars on Top 40 radio anymore.
Yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, I think there might be a resurgence, but it's. I mean, now of course the business is so different. I'm just happy that I consider myself to be a survivor.
Yes.
Especially with a lot of, like, you look at the Ramones, all of them dead.
Yeah.
I mean, I played in the Ramones for a brief period of time.
Sure. Well, what was that experience like?
Well, I was friends with Joey. I didn't really like the acrimony that existed within the band. Johnny Ramone, he was very kind of right wing, as we know. A lot of headbutting, a lot of non-speaking, and Dee Dee was also in the band when I played in the band, and Dee Dee was like, I would say almost like an idiot savant in a way. He was like so creative and so artistic, and sometimes you just thought, that he was like a challenged person, like it was like strange. That article that was just in Rolling Stone kind of spells out a lot of what it was like.
Yeah.
I would have enjoyed kind of working a little bit more with them, but it wasn't really. I told them I would do it temporarily, and I never rehearsed with them. I did shows with them, just trial by fire. I just did coincidentally the 40th anniversary of the first Ramones album. I just did it last week because for the Joey Ramone birthday party, which his brother Mickey Lee has every year. Okay. And Mike Watt from the Minutemen was the bass player, and I never met Mike before, but he lives in L.A. and I'm out here in L.A. and I got in touch with him and he got what I was trying to say about we really need to like rehearse this.
Yeah.
He doesn't call it rehearsing; he calls it practice. He says he doesn't need to rehearse, which I get. He doesn't. He's Mike Watt's one of the most phenomenal musicians I ever played with.
The Stooges.
And we played with the Stooges and the Minutemen, yeah. And we took the time to really kind of woodshed the songs. The songs are so easy that they're difficult. They're almost like brain teasers. And we tried to play them in the right tempos. I mean, later on with the Ramones, it seemed like they were just in a hurry to get off the stage.
Yeah.
I mean, punk
20
rock was
songs
fast.
in 10 minutes.
Yeah, but I mean, like Glenn Matlock always points out with the Pistols, they never really played fast. They were more looking for a groove. You know, if you listen to the first Sex Pistols album, they're not really playing all that fast. And neither is the first Ramones album. You know, it's just aggressive music. And so I did the whole 29 minutes of the first Ramones record in New York a couple of weeks ago. It was really fun. And Craig Leon, the producer of the Ramones album, who co-produced the first Blondie single and also produced Suicide Band, did a Q&A before we played. It was really fun. It's a fun experience.
Now, speaking of Glenn Matlock, I know you have the International Swingers.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's basically why I'm here, probably, to do this interview, is to tell people about the other bands that I'm working with. The Empty Hearts, that record's out. It's available on iTunes. It's available if you could find a record store. It might be. When we went to Japan, they have Tower Records in Japan still, and they had a whole display of the Empty Hearts. It was phenomenal. You know, it was like, you know, going back in time.
Deja vu.
Yeah, and then, the band, the
International Swingers has a new album coming out?
The album is just out now also on iTunes.
And recorded right here in the Valley at Dave Grohl's studio?
Yeah, we did it at the 606 at Dave Grohl, nice enough to help us out with that. And that's available on iTunes, and I'm also at this band called the Split Squad, which is a kind of a fun project with Eddie Munoz from the...
the Plimsolls.
Plimsolls, and Keith Strang from the Fleshtones.
Wow.
And we're actually just we're going to go do a little van tour in Europe coming up shortly. And that record's available as well. It's called the Split Squad. And I'm very proud of all three of those records. And we have a new Blondie record coming out next year, which we're finishing up now. And I just got to keep going, you know.
That's it. You obviously do these projects because you love them.
Yeah, I have a good time. I mean, all those bands, those three bands I've just mentioned, they all came together out of basic friendship that existed already.
It's fun for rocking out.
You know, as you get older, it's kind of hard to find new friends or make friends, or you know, and then friends die. I feel very lucky to have a great handful of musician friends, and I feel like with Mike Watt, I made a new friend recently, which was great. But it's all good, you know. I really can't complain about any of it. I mean, I'm happy, you know, relatively speaking, whatever that is. It's hard to define what being happy means, but.
So what keeps you inspired is just the love that you've always had for playing music and collaborating with others? Yeah,
you know, there's a camaraderie that exists. You know, being a drummer, obviously I have to work with other people. I mean, you can only do so many drum solos. People seem to like the way I play drums. And I get asked to do a lot of different projects. You know, I played with Nancy Sinatra for a while. That was fun. Over the years, I worked with a lot of different people. But yeah, these things I kind of basically, if I can get a band together or somebody else is kind of putting it together and they want me to be a part of it, as long as I like the people and the music, I'm happy to do it. It's fun.
You've done something with the Eurythmics and Pete Townsend, Bob Dylan.
For quite a while.
A lot of great people.
Yeah, a lot of different people.
Yeah. So all that you've seen and been through and all your collaborations, what advice do you give to the young players, the young creative people, this next generation of writers and people coming up? What do they need to concentrate on?
Well, they got to concentrate on their creativity and have it, you know, be real, you know, and just kind of follow your muse and not really kind of try to follow trends at all, you know, which is definitely, you know, you got to... Part of the whole thing is the people you choose to be around, you know. They're going to help you or they're going to hurt you. And, I mean, so many bands break up, you know, even before they get to the point where it might be over money or publishing or something. They don't even, like, get to that point. There's personality clashes. And you got to really believe in what you're doing and, you know, set your goals, you know, I mean, you're starting out, you just want to get a gig, and then maybe you want to get another gig, and then you want to, you know, get some sort of record, some interest, a record deal or something. You know, it all goes in stages. But today, I think everything's going to realign itself. The new business model is going to completely get in place. They're probably going to up the royalties for Spotify and things like that eventually, and all that kind of stuff. But if you want to, you know, if you have the inspiration to do music, and you're not really doing it for the, I don't think anybody ever really did it for the money. You know, anybody that's really successful, the money. I mean, of course, the money comes if you're successful, but that shouldn't be your main impetus for making music or making art in general. And but it is, you know, I mean, all the people from the '60s, they said, you know, it was the way out of the factory for a lot of people. All the working class folks in the UK. You know, I kind of feel, in some ways, I'm not sure what I'd be doing if I wasn't a successful musician at this point. So I don't know. But you got to persevere, be able to deal with rejection, and you know, you spend more time, less time in your room, and more time out in front of people. I make the analogy of CBGB was like a workshop, an artist workshop. There's like actors workshops everywhere. There's comedy workshops, but I don't know if they ever put it the same way a musician's workshop. Really, CBGB was like that. It enabled you to make your mistakes in public. You kind of mentioned maybe Blondie wasn't the band that everybody thought was going to have the big success. Maybe that's because we were forming in public and making our mistakes in public, and you know, using that feedback to point us in a certain way. And I mean, when I was a kid, there was always a better drummer than me, always a better guitar player than it. But you know, they weren't really interested. I mean, you could be great in your room, but when you get in front of an audience, you know, it could change. You know, it's a whole other experience. You have to be prepared for that. I would say just get out. The sooner you get out in public, and if you want to be a performer, singer, songwriter, is do it in public. It doesn't matter if you suck. Just keep doing it. You know, that's the main thing. It's invaluable, the experience you get from performing in public versus doing it behind closed doors. It's no comparison. You know, I mean, it's great to be rehearsed. It's great to have pre-production on a record and all that kind of stuff. But it's also great to get just a feedback and a feeling that you really can't get anywhere else but by playing in front of people. That's one of the most important things. Don't be afraid to get out and play. I find more fun watching a band that's not that good versus a band that's completely professional. I get more kick out of seeing like kids trying to, you know, put it together. Yeah. And I find that inspiring. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, Clem, congratulations on the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, an amazing run with Blondie, and can't wait to spread the news on the Empty Hearts.
Yeah,
and of course, International Swingers and Splits.
The Split Squad.
Split Squad.
Yeah, the International Swingers record is just out, so you might want to check that out.
Great.
Okay, thanks,
We're going to wave the flag. Thank you so much, Clem.
Somebody once said.